After making sure that his people had made it out safely, Stephen turned to the sentry guard students. "What are you planning to do?" "Weren't you listening? We're going to wait for the participants to leave before picking up the leftovers." "That won't work," Stephen said. "The other participants are probably thinking the same thing. But if you really do go back, there might be items buried in the graves." The sentry guard students didn't have the courage to dig into the soil to search for items. Who knew how many dead bodies of the participants were down there? It wouldn't take long for them to break out of the amber and start attacking randomly. The blood was also seeping into the soil and being absorbed by the bodies. The more time passed, the stronger the corpses would get. The air was tense as the participants who'd escaped the cemetery eyed each other. Some of them had joined forces, while others maintained their independence. Monica, Tobias, and the other mercenaries had around 60 people in their group. They were a powerful team. They waited outside the cemetery to threaten participants into handing over their items. The Mercenary Guilds Alliance, the Asoras, and the Sullivan family were the only teams Stephen was familiar with, but from the way the other participants gathered in groups, there were more that he didn't recognize. Later in the day, the number of teams lingering outside the cemetery gradually decreased. They left to prepare for the second round. The participants who'd had their items stolen went back to the cemetery to hunt the malevolent will again. With prior experience, it was much easier the second time around. When the Sentry Guard's students saw their chance, they rushed into the cemetery. Stephen transmitted his voice to the threadworms. "Did you find anything?" "We found a badge. Are you going to help them search?" "No, I'm just going to pretend." Stephen went into the cemetery and paced around the entrance, pretending to search for dropped items. The threadworms nudged a badge through the soil beneath his feet. He bent down and picked it up. It looked like an ordinary metallic trinket, but when he touched it, pain coursed through his nerves. But it wasn't real. It was just an illusion conjured by the malevolent will. The mental interference lasted for a split second, but the short duration was enough for an enemy to strike. No wonder there had been so many casualties among the participants when they picked up the items. Stephen stored the badge in the lapis lazuli tower. With so many deaths, the number of corpses had increased, making it harder for the participants to get a malevolent will and steal one of its items. Stephen watched as one participant shoved his fist through a corpse's chest, but he couldn't pull his hand back because of the contraction of the corpse's muscles. With nowhere to run, a malevolent will sliced him open with its scythe. After another round of bloodshed, the number of participants dropped significantly. There were some who surrendered and gave up on the City Lord challenge. The Sentry Guard students were locked in battle with a malevolent will. One of them blocked its scythe, while the other threw out a ball of energy. It annihilated the ghostly entity, and its items fell into their hands. The Sentry Guard students were satisfied and left the cemetery with Stephen. As they walked past the gate, a group of cultivators blocked their path. Stephen was shocked to see Nadorun and his team. "It looks like our trip to the polar domain wasn't wasted," Nadorun said with a smirk. The Sentry Guard students nervously tightened their grips on their swords. "Are you participating in the challenge? Even if you win, you'll never become a City Lord." "I'm not interested in the City Lord's position. We're here to kill members of the Mystic Covenant. Smuggle as much as you want. No one will come and rescue you." Nadorun had originally planned to detonate the underground space in the Infinite Prison, but sneaking inside wasn't as easy as it seemed. He decided to wait for a better opportunity. In the meantime, he and his team had resumed their search for Mystic Covenant members. They found Malevolent Will's locations and coincidentally ran into Stephen and the Sentry Guard students. The ancient cultivators drew their swords, and blades of light descended from the sky. The Sentry Guard students condensed massive phantoms of two ancient beasts, a tortoise and a porcupine. The tortoise blocked the blades of light with its shell as the spikes on the porcupine shot out like a storm. Stephen didn't have powerful techniques like them. He created 3 clones with familiar black scythes in their hands. The Sentry Guard students were in disbelief. Those 3 scythes belonged to the malevolent will. "What are you doing, Stephen? And where did you get all that?" "If those traitors destroy these weapons, you'll fail the first round. Your efforts would have been for nothing." "That's not important right now. If we don't go all out, we'll be the ones to die. Even if their bodies are indestructible, they're not invincible. When they're tainted by negative energy from the scythes, they'll turn into corpses." Stephen deliberately raised his voice to make sure Nadorun and his team heard what he said. In reality, the sights were an imitation that the threadworms created with their iron sand. Nadorun's team heard every word. They immediately leaped back and put some distance between them. The tortoise and the porcupine excelled at offense and defense when they worked together. They were about to rush over to trap Nadorun's team when an explosion set off next to them, spewing dust into the air. The Sentry Guard students were just as surprised and confused as their phantoms. What's happening? Did the ancient cultivators dig this trap? Relax, Stephen said. One of my beasts dug this tunnel. My clone's weapons are fake. They're not from the malevolent will. I was just trying to scare the ancient cultivators so we could get out of there. The second round will be more intense than the first. We need to conserve our energy. The Sentry Guard students were speechless. Killing the Mystic Covenant's traitors would be considered an achievement. They'd lost the opportunity because of Stephen. When the smoke and dust disappeared, the Sentry Guard students had disappeared. As Nadorun's team destroyed Stephen's clones and shattered their sights, they realized that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the Sentry Guard students. Stephen had also vanished. The miasma was so dense that they wouldn't be able to find them with their auras. Nadorun wasn't about to give up. He left with his team to search for the location of the second round. One day later, the cemetery returned to normal. Around 1/3 of the participants had turned into walking corpses. The elders, warden, and guards outside the Infinite Prison had been waiting for the first round to end. It wasn't that interesting. The scythe was the only dangerous thing about the malevolent will. The second round would be more exciting. There are 1,500 participants left. They're still fighting amongst themselves. There aren't that many people competing for the City Lord position. They've brought their subordinates with them, so it's hard to tell how strong they really are. Subordinates are important to a City Lord. They make their lives easier. When the third round begins, we'll see what the true competitors are capable of. The reflections in the crystal mirrors changed into ruins on a mountain that had been severely eroded by wind. The stone pillars were riddled with holes and twisted like withering trees. This was the Ghost General's territory. The Ghost General was an entity formed from negative energy, but it was much stronger than the malevolent will. The higher the quantity and quality of negative energy, the stronger its existence would be. The elders examined the reflections, but the land was barren. They began to brew a pot of tea to pass the time. The Ghost General isn't here yet. When is it going to show up? When the participants arrive, it'll be attracted to their auras. They see cultivators as food. At least 1,000 participants will die this round. The more people that fail, the stronger the Ghost General will get. As the challenge progressed, dangerous elements like the corpses in the cemetery had to be eliminated. The warden volunteered. His guards were skilled cultivators. They'd be more than enough to clean up the mess. More importantly, completing a task from the elders would strengthen their connection with the Zenith Council. If you and your guards leave, what will happen to the prison's security? I guarantee no one will be able to break in, the warden said. Seeing how confident he was, the elders agreed. As the participants headed north of the cemetery along the edge of the abyss, small battles erupted here and there. They didn't think about the monster they'd have to face when they arrived at their destination. They only cared about the threats around them. Sneak attacks and traps were common. Explosions could be heard from time to time. The threadworms burrowed underground for more than 10 miles before slowly drilling out of the soil and scanning their surroundings. When they confirmed that there was no one around, they opened their mouths and let Stephen and the sentry guards out. The sentry guards sputtered as they took deep breaths to clear their airways. Your beasts are so weird. The space inside their stomach is like a dusty warehouse. They store all kinds of things in there. Stephen ignored them and transmitted his voice to the Sky Lion. They'd been separated for a long time, and he didn't know how the beasts or the Sullivan family were doing. We're halfway there, the Sky Lion reported. There are so many participants out to get the Sullivan family. I dealt with them in secret, but if we get too close to the ruins, the participants will see through their disguises and find out they're here. The beasts had done a surprisingly good job of protecting the Sullivan family. Unlike the other teams participating in the challenge, there were no casualties among the hired cultivators. According to the Sky Lion's observation, there were stone pillars at the center of the ruins. The way they were arranged was consistent with an array. They were also emitting a magnetic field. The Sky Lion had flown over the mountain, but there was no sign of the Ghost General. It was unknown if the Ghost General was a single entity or if there were more than one, like the malevolent will. The beasts had keen senses, but even they couldn't sense its presence. For safety reasons, the Sky Lion told the beasts and the Sullivan family to stay where they were. "What are the other participants doing?" Stephen asked. "Fighting with each other. They probably want to wrap up their internal conflicts before continuing with the challenge. Even the Asuras are attacking the mercenaries. They were at it for hundreds of rounds before splitting up. The ancient cultivators are on the mountain too. They're searching for Mystic Covenant members. Track the ancient cultivators from a distance and see if you can find out what they're up to. On it." Stephen and the Sentry Guard students walked along the edge of the abyss, carefully making their way north. They came across a river flowing into the abyss as a spectacular waterfall. A group of people were pacing back and forth. Stephen went closer and saw two of the Falcon Guild leader's students and the other mercenaries. Monica and Tobias weren't around. From the bonfire and traces of remnant food, it looked like the mercenaries had set up camp by the river for a break. The second round was about to begin, and this was Stephen's opportunity to decrease the number of mercenaries and make the third round easier. "I'm going to cross the river and attack the mercenaries." The Sentry Guard students never knew what Stephen was thinking. When they wanted to fight, he wanted to run, and when they wanted to avoid a fight, he wanted to provoke his enemies. They didn't argue with him and let him do what he wanted. Neither of them cared if he survived or got himself killed. Stephen materialized his sword, preparing for an ambush. If it didn't work out, he could always turn around and run. They were close to the abyss, and the miasma was especially dense in this area. It wouldn't be that hard to get away. Before he could attack, 20 participants appeared out of nowhere and took action first. The mercenaries had ganged up on them and stolen items they'd picked up in the cemetery. They were determined to get them back and participate in the second round. The 20 participants condensed a flaming phantom in the sky, and spheres of energy rained over the river, dispersing the darkness of the miasma. The ground shook from the explosions, and a shockwave turned the surrounding vegetation and rocks into dust. Stephen and the Sentry Guard students had to press themselves to the ground and cover their heads with their arms to avoid the brunt of the impact. In only a few seconds, the mercenaries and the participants had fought hundreds of rounds. The air was filled with pungent smell of blood. Several mercenaries were dead. The Sentry Guard students were impressed with the participants' techniques. Wealth was reflected in a cultivator's choice of weapon. They were clearly from a wealthy family, but even though they had unique weapons, that wouldn't be enough to get rid of the mercenaries. One of the participants tossed a string of dazzling, luminous pearls into the air. They began to absorb spiritual energy from their surroundings until they were filled to the brim. The flaming phantom in the sky swallowed the pearls and amplified their spiritual energy. "Those gems look like the illusory pearls I used to have," Stephen said. "The phantom in the sky can absorb the spiritual energy, but it can't digest the pearls," the Sentry Guard student explained. "It's converting and amplifying the spiritual energy using a special method." The participants lunged for the mercenaries. As their weapons clashed, the phantom in the sky released the refined spiritual energy in a burst of lightning that struck the mercenaries relentlessly. Stephen summoned the iridescent dragon. It looked small and harmless to the Sentry Guard students. They were curious about Stephen's true strength and wondered what this little pink dragon could do. The iridescent dragon released a stream of bubbles. They multiplied as they drifted with the wind. Minor phenomena like this were usually ignored on the battlefield. The colorful bubbles blended in with the unique landscape, and no one paid them any attention. It wasn't until the bubbles enveloped the mercenaries that they realized that they were caught in a strange technique. The bubbles connected with their mental energy, and pain tore through them like a sword. Stephen flew into the air, ready to join the battle. His black outfit helped him blend into the night sky. He tossed the alchemist's furnace next to the river. The flames sparked to life, raising the temperature to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The mercenaries felt like their skin had been splashed with lava. The participants took a step back as Stephen landed next to them. While the mercenaries were distracted by the scorching heat, he created 2 clones that searched the dead bodies littering the ground for the items they'd stolen from the participants. The clones returned and dropped the items from the malevolent will on the ground in a pile. The participants retrieved their items and thanked Stephen. They were now qualified to participate in the second round, but they weren't about to leave before dealing with the mercenaries. The mercenaries were infuriated when they realized that Stephen was among the crowd. But Monica and Tobias weren't here, and they weren't sure if they could take on this many participants on their own. They turned to the Falcon Guild leader's 2 students for their opinions. Before they could make a decision, the participants surrounded them in a tight circle. The free-for-all resumed. The flames in the furnace condensed into hundreds of bats covered in fire. The bats flew towards the mercenaries, ignoring their swords. The fire enveloping their bodies melted the blades. The flames crept up the hilt, burning the mercenaries' hands and forcing them to abandon their weapons. The bats were even harder to deal with barehanded. They landed on the mercenaries and bit their skin, absorbing their blood and spiritual energy. The participants finished the mercenaries off with their weapons. As more blood spilled, the bats became more active. It only took them half a minute before more than half of the mercenaries were dead. The Falcon Guild leader's students gave the remaining mercenaries a signal before jumping into the river. The rest of the mercenaries followed suit, and they disappeared into the raging waves. Stephen had no plans of provoking the strange, spider-like beast, and the participants had their own reservations about the abyss, so the battle came to an end. There aren't that many mercenaries left. Let's forget about them. What if they come after us after the challenge? There's nothing to worry about. The only thing they care about is money and power. They rely on their numbers to intimidate others. I won't be surprised if their enemies stormed into their headquarters one day to take revenge. Or they might just target their treasury. The participants spoke confidently. They didn't think too highly of the mercenaries. But one of them, an elderly man with a white beard, caught Stephen's attention. He claimed he knew where the mercenaries' treasury was. As the participants headed to the location of the second round, Stephen left the Sentry Guard students behind and followed the elderly man. Sir, I was impressed by your performance during the battle. You must be an experienced cultivator. The elderly man sighed. You don't have to flatter me. I'm just a poor cultivator who lives in the wilderness. The city lord position comes with many benefits. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have joined the challenge. To tell you the truth, it hasn't been long since I ascended to the Elysian realm. If you don't mind, can you tell me where the mercenaries' treasury is? If you'd like something in return, please let me know. The elderly man gave Stephen a once-over. It was only at the silver rank. The elderly man patted his shoulder. You have potential. If you cultivate for 100 years, you might be able to break through to the next 2 or 3 ranks. Then you'll be at the same level as the treasury's guards. Before then, don't bother risking your life. The 3 ranks above silver rank were gold, platinum, and diamond. There was a big difference in strength between each rank. I understand your concern, but don't worry. I'll be careful. This information will be very helpful to me, Stephen urged. Well, sharing the information with you won't do me any harm, so I'll tell you. The elderly man reached into his pocket and pulled out a scroll. A map had been recorded. Stephen tried to match the terrain with his limited knowledge of the Elysian Realm's domains, but he didn't know where this place was. Was the mercenaries' treasury located in a different realm? The elderly man knew what Stephen was thinking and smiled in amusement. It's in the Elysian Realm. The treasury is hidden in an underground ancient city that collapsed a long time ago. Before the Elysian Realm was divided into 5 domains, there were cities scattered across the realm. After the ancient war, many of these cities sank to the bottom of the ocean or were buried deep in the earth. Very few people remember them now. The Mercenary Guilds Alliance somehow got their hands on this information and found one of these ancient cities. They modified it and turned it into a secure location to store their wealth. They've stationed numerous guards there. This map is a record of the ancient city. As for where it is, I have no idea. Only the mercenaries would know. They should have a blueprint of the reconstruction of the city. I did some digging, and the construction workers who renovated the city vanished without a trace. I suspect the mercenaries killed them to keep their treasury hidden. Stephen memorized the map and expressed his sincere gratitude to the elderly man.
The Falcon Guild leader's 2 students and the mercenaries had embedded their swords into the cliff after tumbling off the edge. The sound of the waterfall roared in their ears as they waited 2 hours. After making sure the participants had left, they shamefully climbed back up the cliff. Monica and Tobias had left the Falcon Guild leaders, 2 students, in charge of the mercenaries while they were gone. They had to take responsibility for losing the Malevolent Will's items. Monica and Tobias will be back soon. We should go after the participants and get back the Malevolent Will's items. You still want to participate in the second round? Our task is to make sure one of us becomes the city lord. We can't quit halfway. The mercenaries gave the Falcon Guild leader students dubious looks. After the bloody battle 2 hours ago, they weren't interested in risking their lives anymore. As mercenaries, they didn't have much loyalty. Their only priorities were money and their lives. When faced with a threat, their safety came first. You 2 are strong. You can go ahead and chase after Stephen and the other participants. We should all go. Monica and Tobias won't be too happy when they come back and find out what happened. We need to recover from the fight. You 2 will have to go alone. The Falcon Guild leader students glared at the mercenaries, but they weren't intimidated. It was you 2 who ordered us to retreat. If we're going to fight to the death, we should have done it 2 hours ago. Are you all blind? Can't you see how urgent the situation is? We were just following orders. Who's really at fault here? While they were arguing, Monica and Tobias returned. They left to search for Nadorun's team. Every cultivator had something unique about the aura that identified them. Monica had sensed Nadorun's team fighting with Stephen and 2 other cultivators in the forest and went to track them down. The city lord position was important, but the Falcon Guild leader wanted the formula for the strengthening liquid more than anything. You lost a fight against Stephen and the participants, and they stole the Malevolent Will's items. Monica reached for her sword, itching to kill all of these useless subordinates in front of her. Tobias quickly tried to play the role of peacemaker. We should make do with what we have. We'll deal with Stephen and the other participants during the second round. Monica and Tobias had lost track of Nadorun's team in the miasma, but because of their cooperation in the past, if a fight broke out, they would be on the same side. The journey to the ruins on the mountain took several days. The farther the participants went, the stronger the magnetic field was. Miasma shrouded the mountain. They couldn't see more than a few feet in front of them. At the center of the ruins was a stone forest. Rocks protruded from the ground. They were like stalactites or stalagmites in a karst cave, but their material was sturdier. Many participants were already at the edge of the ruins, overlooking the center. Their auras mixed together, making it impossible to identify them. It's time for me to leave. Take care of yourselves. The Sentry Guard students glanced at Stephen in confusion. Where are you going? The Sullivan family's nearby. I'm going to join them. I signed up for this challenge to help them, and I always keep my promises. I should fight side by side with them now that they're here. Besides, you know how low my cultivation is. You 2 are strong. I'll only be a burden. Without waiting for a reply, Stephen left with large strides. He couldn't wait to get the Sentry Guard students out of his hair. On the way here, Dante and Fiona had eliminated many participants aiming to take down the Sullivan family. The beasts were rarely around, but Dante and Fiona knew that they were never too far. They could sense their auras whenever fights broke out in the shadows. The beasts were only helping the Sullivan family because of Stephen. Whether they won the challenge or not, they owed him a huge favor. Did you come up here alone? There's danger everywhere, Fiona said. I'm pretty lucky. I stayed at the back of the crowd of participants. I don't usually take part in fights. What's the situation? Stephen asked. Dante introduced the cultivators they'd hired. Their cultivators have reached the peak of the gold rank. Some of them are at the diamond rank. Stephen looked at each of them closely to remember their faces so he wouldn't accidentally target them in battle. Their auras were like towering mountains, but compared to Nadorun's team, there was a big gap. The participants are smarter than they look. They're waiting at the edge of the ruins. They won't venture too far if they're not confident. They sent out their mounts to look around. Once they find out what's going on, everyone will move at the same time. Stephen motioned to the sky as he explained. Dante and Fiona looked up and saw a beast flying at a low altitude, circling the mountain overhead to get a feel of the situation. It wasn't a beast from the Asura realm. It had been tamed and trained by a wealthy family participating in the challenge. A low and deep roar sounded from the forest. A chain spiraled through the fog and wrapped around the beast. It was thrown into the ground. Before the beast could resist, the ghost general stepped out of the miasma and crushed it beneath his heel. The beast's flesh and internal organs splattered over the ruins. One of the participants cursed when he lost his connection with the beast. It had been with them for many years. The people around him tried to reassure him that maybe they were just too far to see each other, but the cultivator could summon their mounts from anywhere as long as they were in the same realm. The fact that their connection had ceased meant that the beast was dead. The participant was Holden Ruiz, the grandson of Amethyst Auction House's CEO. Their business had branches across the 5 domains, and the Ruiz family was one of the wealthiest in the realm. Like his grandfather, Holden had a talent for business and extensive connections. The martial arts factions ranked at the top owned their own auction house. They divided the management responsibilities to Amethyst Auction House and enjoyed their dividends without lifting a finger. As for the city lords, they received management fees, sponsorship fees, or donations from the Amethyst Auction House. Holden took care of everything that needed to be settled with money. He was well known in the business industry and the martial arts world. Holden ordered the participants from wealthy families around him to condensed phantoms to attack the ghost general. The more, the better. He didn't care what was at the center of the ruins. He would kill it and avenge his beast. The other participants aren't doing anything, one of the participants advised. It's not wise for us to take the lead. Who cares? If they try to take advantage of us, we'll kill them next. A herd of phantom mammoths over 60 feet tall appeared in a flash of golden light. They rammed into pillars, attracting every participant's attention. When the stone toppled over, they glowed in eerie purple light and hovered above the ground. They shot through the air and bombarded the mammoths, but they weren't destroyed by the impact. Whoever condensed those phantoms is strong, Stephen said. They're still standing after an attack like that. Fiona cast a wary glance at their surroundings. The ghost general is here. He was the one controlling the stone pillars. The phantom mammoths were strong, but there were too many stone pillars. They lasted for 2 minutes before dispersing into particles of light. The participants held their breaths and waited. They weren't confident that they wouldn't survive if they were in the mammoth's place. The ghost general walked across the stone forest. He was clad in armor, holding a blade in one hand and a chain in the other. His skin was deathly gray. Behind him was a 3-headed dog. It growled as its saliva burnt holes in the soil. The magnetic field surrounding the ruins was the ghost general's domain. It interfered with the participants' senses, but the ghost general wasn't affected. He had a clear view of the mountain and every living being present, including their weaknesses and strengths. He could see the participants, but they couldn't see him through the miasma. Holden's attack had failed, but his confidence didn't waver. He called out to the other participants from wealthy families. How long are you all going to stand there? My beast is dead. The ghost general is here. Let's work together and kill him. When he's dead, we'll split his items and move on to the final round. Holden was well aware of the wealthy family's strength. There was a clear gap between families with a long heritage and cultivators who were hired to be mercenaries. The 4 strongest and wealthiest families in the Haven domain were Lynn, Gallagher, Parsons, and Monroe families. They'd made ample preparations before the City Lord Challenge began. Grayson Lynn, Todd Gallagher, Rodri Parsons, and Alyssa Monroe were heirs to their respective families, and they were here to assist Holden. Rodri and Alyssa gestured to their subordinates, who nodded and left in the direction of the other participants. They condensed a phantom of a skull with a green fire flicking in its eye sockets. It crashed into unsuspecting participants at blinding speed. When they collided, the participants' thoughts and consciousness were instantly erased. Hundreds of participants controlled by the skull walked up the 5 heirs of wealthy families. They gave the participants weapons and instructed them to charge into the stone forest. The participants retained their cultivations, even though they were being controlled. Their auras surged around them as they obeyed and ran into the miasma. Rhodey turned to the other participants, who were watching them. If you want to take advantage of us, feel free to do so, but remember that there will be consequences. I suggest you stay away from the ruins and watch the show from here. Before we get the Ghost General's items, we'll kill anyone who interferes without permission. His overbearing and threatening tone angered the participants, but they didn't dare refute him. They didn't have the courage to go up against their families. The top 4 wealthy families in the Haven domain were even more ruthless than the Mercenary Guilds Alliance. Peace was the basic principle of business. The mercenaries maintained a neutral attitude by carrying out missions for rewards and making it their priority to avoid offending their customers. But the top 4 wealthy families in the Haven domain were different. They relied on their influence to pressure others into doing what they wanted. The participants they controlled were prime examples. There was only one outcome to charging recklessly into the ruins.
They're from wealthy families in the Haven domain, and they're much stronger than the Sullivan family, Dante explained to Stephen. This challenge has basically been decided. We should stay put for now. The other participants had the same mindset, but the Asuras were getting restless with all the waiting. Their gazes swept the participants before falling on Stephen. The wealthy family's words were law here, but settling internal conflicts wasn't an act of provocation against them. Stephen sensed their hostility boring into his back and turned around, making eye contact with the Asuras. The celestial beast isn't here. There's no one around to save you. Let's not waste any more time and settle our grudge right now. The Asuras brandished their weapons and lunged for him. Their hatred for Stephen had exceeded their hatred for the beasts. They believed that if the human martial artist hadn't interfered in the war, the Asuras wouldn't have been kicked out of their realm. The celestial beast was intelligent and powerful, but he and his army of beasts wouldn't have been enough to win the war. The ghost fire in Stephen's sword reacted instantly. It projected the angles and trajectories of the Asura's attacks into Stephen's mind and outlined a safe path for him. In the eyes of outsiders, he appeared to be on the verge of being sliced to pieces by the Asura's weapons, but he simply stepped to the side, and the fatal strikes brushed past his skin harmlessly. The Asuras condensed a horde of strange phantoms using their blood. Stephen's sword phased through them as they surrounded him. They moved and chanted like they were performing a sacrificial dance. Stephen's blood and inner energy surged violently inside him. A bright red mark appeared on his skin, sizzling at the edges with green smoke. He didn't know what kind of curse this was, but he could feel his energy draining into the red mark. The Asuras didn't attack. They stood there and watched, waiting for the curse to slowly kill him. They wouldn't be able to let go of their hatred unless they tortured him until he broke and died a gruesome death. The mercenaries were also watching the fight. Who knew Stephen had so many enemies? We don't even need to kill him ourselves. We can wait for the Asura to do it for us. That curse isn't that strong, Monica interrupted. If he brought enough of the correct pills, his energy won't drain that fast. It was no secret that Stephen had killed the alchemist of the Demon Hunter Guild and stolen his furnace. He must have obtained an astonishing amount of pills from him. Tobias didn't intend on staying on the sidelines. He wanted to avenge his teacher. Killing him won't affect the wealthy families' plan. Standing around and watching is a waste of an opportunity. Monica glanced at the Asuras with disgust. The Asuras were waiting with the other participants because they knew their limits. She had no intention of working with weaklings. If you want to join the fight, go ahead. I'll stay here. Tobias unsheathed his sword and rushed at Stephen, aiming for his neck. Stephen moved to the side at the last minute, just like how he dodged the Asura's attacks earlier. Tobias was about to lunge for him again when he felt a bone-piercing chill in the air. A layer of ice condensed on his arms, and cold energy invaded his body. While Tobias was shattering the ice with his energy, the Asuras took his place. Since they had an ally, they might as well finish Stephen off here. But when they stepped forward, a sandstorm obscured their view. Stephen was gone as the wind died down. There was nowhere to run except the forest. Tobias and the Asuras chased after him and disappeared into the miasma. The participants stayed where they were. If they went after him, they'd be sending themselves to their deaths. Holden, Grayson, Todd, Rodri, Alyssa, and their subordinates had followed the participants they controlled into the stone forest. They wouldn't hesitate to kill whoever disturbed their fight with the Ghost General. In the forest, Stephen set down the furnace and used it as a distraction and a shield. He'd asked the threadworms to secretly condense their iron sand around the area.
The metallic properties mixed in with the magnetic field surrounding the ruins and caused a double interference. The miasma was also thicker in the forest, making it easy to hide.
As a member of the Falcon Guild's intelligence team, Tobias was cautious.
He's trying to lead us deeper into the forest. We need to be careful. The Asoras didn't share his concerns. He's just one person. What's there to be afraid of? The wealthy families told us to stay away from their fight with the Ghost General. If they see us, they'll think we're opposing them. Making new enemies won't benefit either of us. The Asoras sharpened their senses. They couldn't hear any sounds of fighting, which meant they were still far away from the conflict. We'll stop when we're near the wealthy families. The Zodiac Beast had been hibernating in Stephen's spiritual world, slowly growing stronger from the faith of his internal world's inhabitants. He didn't know how strong they'd gotten, but he decided that this was a good time as any to test the power of faith. He summoned the Zodiac Rat and Rabbit. Their small and furry appearances made them look like harmless house pets. Stephen felt their auras had deepened, but it was hard to tell for sure. A beast's strength couldn't be measured with the same criteria used for cultivators. The Rat and Rabbit looked around. It's been a long time since we left your spiritual world, and the first thing we see is this creepy forest. Where are we? We're in the polar domain. This is at the edge of the abyss. I don't have time to explain. I'll tell you more after we deal with them. The Rat and Rabbit followed Stephen's line of sight and saw Tobias and the Asoras. They jumped out of his arms and began creating clones of themselves. Tobias and the Asoras spotted Stephen at the same time and dashed towards him. Just as they were about to launch an attack, they felt something climbing up their pants. Tobias looked down and saw the critters. What are these things? Rats? Rabbits? Were there wild animals in the forest? The Asoras were no stranger to the Zodiac Beasts. Kill them! They're beasts. They're followers of the celestial beast in the Asura realm. Their clothing with enhanced defensive properties and their barriers of energy were no match for the rats and rabbits' sharp teeth. They were bitten over 1,000 times in the span of a few seconds. Tobias and the Asoras tried to shake the little beasts off of them. If they used their weapons, they would risk injuring themselves. Stephen darted towards the Asoras and attacked while they were distracted. Their skin had been tempered, but his sword had been refined and his cultivation had increased since the war with the beasts. Deep gashes littered the Asora's skin by the time Stephen leaped back. The rats and rabbits weren't that strong individually, but when there were hordes of them, they were hard to fend off. Tobias knew they were at a disadvantage. They wouldn't be able to kill Stephen in the forest. They'd have to wait for him to leave. Tobias gathered his energy and summoned a phantom vulture. He leaped onto its back and motioned for the Asoras to do the same. The miasma surrounding the forest made it hard to see. They didn't know which direction they'd entered the forest from, but they might have a better view of their surroundings if they flew higher. The Asoras jumped onto the vulture's back and brushed the rats and rabbits off their bodies. Their clothes were riddled with holes, and their skin was stained with blood. As the vulture ascended into the sky, there was no end to the miasma in sight. It had to slow down in case there were beasts or structures around that it couldn't see. None of them had noticed a tiny rat clinging to the feathers of the vulture's tail. One of the threadworms returned to its original size, while the others went back to Stephen's spiritual world. Stephen leaped onto its back, and they followed the vulture from the ground. We've been in the forest for some time now, but we still haven't heard any sounds of fighting. I can't tell where they're headed because of this magnetic field. I think they're going in circles. There's nowhere to go except forward, Stephen said. If we follow them, they might lead us to wealthy families. Maybe they'll know how to get out of the forest. The Ghost General hovered over the mountain, overlooking the forest below. These ruins were his territory, and all trespassers would be killed. He petted the three-headed dog. Play with them and eat as much as you want. I'll find you after I shoot down that bird. The dog had 3 sets of abilities unique to each head. Its mouth watered at the thought of a delicious meal. It happily bounded towards the stone forest. The vulture maintained a slow and steady speed through the miasma. It stopped when a figure blurred by mist appeared up ahead. Tobias thought it was one of the participants who'd sneaked up into the forest despite the wealthy family's warning. "Who are you?" he demanded. A man clad in armor from head to toe stepped into view and drew a circle with his sword. It was too late by the time Tobias and the Asoras realized the man was the Ghost General.
A whirlwind enveloped the vulture, slicing off its feathers from its wings. Tobias and the Asuras tried to condense an energy barrier, but the wind was too strong. The vulture howled in pain as more feathers were torn from its body. Tobias couldn't let his mount get killed. He quickly summoned it back to his spiritual world and landed on the ground with the Asuras. Stephen had been watching the battle through the eyes of the rat clone clinging to the vulture's feathers. The Ghost General was far more than he could handle. He told the threadworms to change direction before the Ghost General targeted them. Stephen now understood why the elders had set up 2 rounds before the third. The first was to weed out some of the weak, while the second tested one's ability to lead. The city lord was a leadership position, and strength and charisma were both needed to win the hearts of the people. The Ghost General's laughter echoed through the forest as he landed in front of Tobias and the Asuras, blocking their path. Did you really think you could get away from me? Without a beast, you're slower than a snail. Tobias inwardly cursed the wealthy families as questions raced through his mind. Where had they all gone? Why didn't they stop the Ghost General? Were they dead? The Ghost General's whirlwind had sliced into the Asura's skin, deep enough to penetrate bone. They couldn't defeat him on their own. They exchanged glances with Tobias, silently communicating with each other through their eyes, before running off in different directions. Whoever the Ghost General decided to chase would be considered unlucky. But their little trick didn't work on the Ghost General. He threw out his chain, and everything within range, including the trees and the Asuras, were shredded. Blood and flesh rained from the sky, filling the air with the scent of death. The Ghost General glanced in the direction of where Stephen and the threadworms had escaped, but he didn't chase after them. He turned around and headed towards the wealthy families instead. When Stephen felt the aura locked on to him disappear, he told the threadworm to stop. The Ghost General killed the Asuras in an instant. Their defenses were nothing to him. The threadworm settled behind a cluster of trees out of sight. Should we keep searching for the wealthy families and follow them out of the forest? The Ghost General didn't come after us, so he's probably going after them. We'll be targeted if we meet up with them. But they're our best bet. We can't leave on our own. The miasma's too dense in this forest. We can't tell where the entrances and exits are. Stephen rolled up his sleeve. The red mark had disappeared when the Asuras were killed. It seemed the curse was connected to the caster's life. He was trapped in the forest, but at least his energy wasn't being drained anymore. After the vulture disappeared, the rat's clone had tumbled to the forest floor. It boldly trailed after the Ghost General after he killed the Asuras. It was small, and it didn't emit any aura. The rat had tens of thousands of clones. None of them had been destroyed, but even if they had, there were so many of them that it didn't matter. Through another clone's eyes, the rat saw a strange dog with 3 heads. I've never seen a beast like that, the rat said, climbing onto Stephen's shoulder as it described what its clone was seeing. There shouldn't be any wild beasts in the forest. This environment isn't suitable for survival. It's probably the Ghost General's mount, Stephen guessed. That's why it's able to hold its own against a fight with the wealthy families. When the participants under the wealthy family's control came across the 3-headed dog, they drew their weapons and attacked it. The dog hadn't dodged, and its heads were severed from its body, leaving only a bloody stump of its neck behind. The dog's aura hadn't weakened, and a second later, its 3 heads grew back. Is it immortal? Stephen asked. No, the heads that fell off are moving on their own, the rat replied. The bloody heads rampaged through the participants, tearing their bodies apart. Several limbs piled on the ground as heads chewed and snapped their bones like they were sticks. The dog was replenishing its energy by devouring the participants' dead bodies. Holden ordered the participants to split up and search the forest for the Ghost General. He was most likely on his way here after sensing the carnage. The team that stayed behind surrounded the dog and unleashed all kinds of techniques to kill it. The dog made no move to dodge. A ray of light shot out of the eyes on each head. They each had different abilities. The participants under the wealthy family's control were taking the lead, and they were the first to be hit. The first ray of light crushed their bodies with tremendous pressure. Their limbs twisted into unnatural angles, their bones shattered, and their internal organs burst. The second ray of light formed a layer of stone on the participants' skin, which seeped into their bodies and solidified their joints. The third ray of light left a skull-shaped mark on the participants that absorbed their spiritual energy at a rapid rate.
When they were squeezed dry, their lives would come to an end. Heavy footsteps sounded from the forest, and the ghost general appeared from the miasma. The chain in his hand was dripping blood. The participants who'd left to search for him had been killed. Holden couldn't sense the ghost general's aura, even though it was right in front of him. He ordered everyone to ignore the three-headed dog and work together to set up an array. The ghost general had shown himself, and victory was only one step away. The bodyguards of the 5 wealthy heirs darted across the clearing and swung their weapons at the ghost general. He didn't move. When their weapons made contact, nothing happened except for the dull sound of collision that rang out and a rush of wind. The participants pointed their swords at the sky, and a golden light spread over the treetops. Stephen could feel the shadow of death looming over him. The wealthy families were planning to blow up the forest, along with the ghost general. There was no time to run. The threadworms burrowed into the soil and dug a tunnel deep underground. A split second later, a deafening explosion tore across the forest. When the ground stilled, the threadworms could still feel the dog's aura. If it was still alive, its master must have survived too. Before the dust settled, a chain swept through the crowd of participants. Its speed exceeded their expectations. Their faces were frozen in shock when the chain impaled them, ending their lives before they had a chance to experience pain and fear. The dog used the smoke as a cover and swallowed the participants whole as it scampered across the clearing. The ghost general absorbed spiritual energy using a much more refined method. The miasma decomposed the bodies, and the spiritual energy they contained dissipated into the air. When the spiritual energy came into contact with the magnetic field, it was absorbed into the ghost general's body. After devouring so many participants, the dog was much bigger than its original size. It happily laid down by the ghost general's feet and waited for its next order. The 5 heirs were dumbfounded. They'd never lost a fight. To be exact, their bodyguards were the best of the best. It was because of them that the 5 heirs had so much influence on the streets. But the ghost general's chains had torn the bodyguards to pieces. Holden glanced at the crowd behind him. There were less than 30 participants left, and they were no longer under control of the skull. The participants were too weak to block even a single attack from the ghost general. The bodyguards were much stronger, but most of them were now dead. An elderly man with a bamboo sword came forward. "Mr. Holden, the ghost general isn't on the same level as the malevolent will. We should preserve the rest of our people and come up with a new strategy. There's no such thing as a perfect array. The magnetic field surrounding the forest has a flaw. It can't trap us here." The man threw his bamboo sword into the air, and it started to spin. It stopped in the direction of the forest exit. The crowd ran for their lives across the clearing. The ghost general took the dog with him to hunt down the participants. His steps were slow. He threw out his chain every few seconds. Sometimes it missed, sometimes it didn't. The participants were filled with terror, not knowing when the next strike would come. The ghost general thrived on their fear. Stephen and the threadworms followed the crowd from a distance. If they lost track of them, they would never get out of this forest. Their presence didn't go unnoticed. The ghost general recognized them. He had chosen to go after the wealthy families because they were a larger group, but now Stephen and the threadworm were within reach. Stephen felt it the moment the ghost general's aura locked onto him again. The chain changed direction and swung toward him. The crowd was relieved when something was distracting the ghost general. They ran without looking back. Stephen and the threadworm reacted quickly. They condensed a layer of ice and iron sand, respectively. When the chain crashed into the barrier, the impact swept up dust, stones, and debris. It grated against the ice as a shrill, high-pitched sound echoed through the forest. Finally, the chain glided off the ice and slashed 3 feet above Stephen's head. The threadworm wasted no time and continued their escape. It wasn't as fast as the beasts who could fly, but if Stephen summoned the dragons, the ghost general would kill them with one swing of his chain. It was much harder to dodge in the open sky than on the ground with the trees as obstacles. The threadworm glided through the forest, ducking under the stone pillars as it passed. The ghost general shattered the pillars with his chain. The slabs of stone almost crashed into Stephen multiple times. "Is it possible to stop him for a short time?" "His body's too tough for us to bite through," the rabbit replied. "What if the zodiac beasts fuse together?" "There's a 50-50 chance he'll make it, but shouldn't you save that technique for the arena?" the rat asked. "We used up a lot of our spiritual energy to fuse. We'll have to hibernate, and you'll be on your own during the 3rd round." Stephen was conflicted. They were halfway through the City Lord Challenge, but the Zodiac Beasts were his trump card. Without them, he might not be able to help the Sullivan family maintain their position in Minori City. In the end, he decided to try something else. "Can you create more clones and carry artillery shells?" "That's easy. It's simpler than fusing." The threadworm opened its mouth, and the artillery shells it stored in its stomach floated onto its back, encasing in a protective barrier of light. The rat and the rabbit created clones of themselves again. This time, their clones were much bigger. They secured the artillery shells to their backs and raced towards the Ghost General. An explosion sounded behind Stephen. He didn't know if the Ghost General would stop or not, but a fraction of a second was all he needed to mingle with the crowd. The sudden appearance of an unfamiliar face shocked the wealthy families and their subordinates. They weren't expecting one of the participants who wasn't controlled to sneak into the forest. "Why are you here?" Holden asked suspiciously. "My old enemies chased me in here," Stephen said. "I hope you don't mind if I join you." "Did you set off that explosion?" "Yeah, but it won't stop the Ghost General for long." The 5 heirs glanced back, signaling for their subordinates and the participants to not attack Stephen. From what they'd seen of his skills and cultivation during the challenge, he wasn't a threat. And he'd actually helped them. The shockwave from the chain of explosions was pushing the crowd towards the exit. Under the lead of the elderly man, the crowd left the forest safely. When the other participants waited at the edge of the ruins heard the commotion, they knew the battle hadn't gone as planned. The defeated expressions of the 5 heirs told them they'd lost the fight. "They went in with hundreds of participants, but most of them are gone." "Is the Ghost General really that powerful?" "We won't find out unless we enter the forest ourselves." Fear didn't deter the participants. Not even death could overpower their greed. One by one, the participants dashed into the forest, covered in miasma. The Ghost General and the 3-headed dog were waiting near the entrance. The sounds of weapons clashing, screaming, and explosions rang out at the same time. It attracted more participants into the forest. They didn't have a powerful backer like the wealthy families, but their numbers had long surpassed the 5 heirs and their subordinates. They had confidence in taking down the Ghost General. Stephen spotted the Sullivan family standing some distance away from the forest. The Sky Lion and some of the beasts from the Asura realm were next to him, watching the lively battle in the forest. Dante and Fiona were relieved that Stephen had escaped without a scratch. "How did it go?" Fiona asked. "The Ghost General is practically unkillable. He's covered in armor and he uses a blade and a chain as his weapons. He also has a dog with 3 heads as his mount." The Ghost General didn't sound that fearsome, but considering how the wealthy families had lost the battle, Stephen's words were credible. Dante and Fiona's expressions turned sullen. If even the 5 heirs had failed to obtain an item from the Ghost General, there was no hope for them. On the off chance that the other participants succeeded, they wouldn't have had an opportunity to steal their items, because the wealthy families would get to them first. Maybe an even bloodier battle would break out. The beasts didn't care about the City Lord Challenge. The prospect of a larger-scale battle made them excited. "We don't need to attack the Ghost General right now. There are other targets, like the mercenaries," the Sky Lion suggested. "They haven't followed the participants into the forest, which means they're not as strong as they make themselves out to be." Stephen didn't know where he was going with this. "There's no benefit in starting a conflict all of a sudden." "There is," the Sky Lion insisted. "Those mercenaries have high positions in the Alliance. They're competitors with the wealthy families. If you get rid of the mercenaries, the wealthy families will see you in a new light. It'll make your life easier." Stephen considered it. It was worth a try. Dante and Fiona tried to talk him out of it, but he'd already made up his mind. Stephen and the Sky Lion confidently made their way to the mercenaries. Most of the beasts had blended into the crowd of participants who hadn't rushed into the forest. They were keeping an eye on the situation at all times. Monica and Tobias were puzzled when Stephen came over. They knew what he was thinking. "You don't seem to be interested in passing the second round," Stephen said. "That's none of your business," Tobias snapped. "Stay away from us." "Why? Since we all have nothing to do, let's fight. Isn't this what you've been waiting for?" Monica hadn't expected someone as weak as Stephen to challenge her so boldly. After the last battle, there were less than 30 mercenaries left. If they had any more casualties, they wouldn't have enough people left to fight in the third round. Stephen didn't wait for an answer. He drew his sword in one smooth motion, angling the blade towards Monica. But it was just a feint. At the last second, he diverted his attack to the mercenaries who'd attacked him and the sentry guard students in the forest. The Sky Lion didn't miss a beat. He followed up with hundreds of poison jades. As Stephen's blade of light swept across the mercenaries and stirred up a storm of blood, the Sky Lion's poison jades invaded their bodies, and their skin began to rot. Monica's expression darkened as she circulated her energy and materialized her red lantern. "How dare you two challenge the Mercenary Guild's alliance? We'll end you here and now." Tobias signaled for his subordinates to take the mercenaries who'd survived further away so they wouldn't be caught up in the battle. "It's 2 against 2, Stephen observed. "That doesn't fit your style. Why aren't you calling everyone else over?" Monica glared at him. "If you were really that skilled, you wouldn't have to keep running from the mercenaries whenever we came after you. I can deal with you myself." If she told the other mercenaries to join in, she would lose the chance to kill Stephen with her own hands. "Monica, how are we going to pass the second round?" Tobias whispered. "The Ghost General is stronger than we thought. We can't waste our energy for nothing." Monica gave him a pointed look. "Are you afraid after your humiliating defeat in the forest? We're not running from Stephen. If we get rid of him now, we'll have one less thorn in our side." Her lantern glowed, and red beams of light shot towards Stephen and the Sky Lion. Stephen was blocked by a storm of ice and fire. When the red light hit the Sky Lion's poison jade, a cloud of poisonous mist filled the arena. "What kind of weapon is that?" the Sky Lion asked curiously. "I wonder what's inside." "It's a lantern," Stephen replied. "I've never seen it being used as a weapon either." Stephen took out the furnace. Its doors opened, and its flames covered the sky. He created 3 clones that surrounded Monica with chains in their hands. If she was caught by their chains, they could easily toss her into the furnace and turn her into ashes. As the chains swept the clearing, Monica dodged with light and agile steps. Tobias was facing off against Stephen and the Sky Lion. As a member of the Falcon Guild's intelligence team, his swordsmanship was dexterous and unpredictable. But the ghost fire in Stephen's sword could predict every strike from a sword or a blade. The Sky Lion had the instincts of a beast, and it was easy for him to avoid fatal blows. Tobias was talented, but he couldn't use his skills to their full potential when Stephen and the Sky Lion kept dodging. Monica shot the Sky Lion a disdainful look. "You always have someone stronger than you by your side when your cultivation is only average." "At least I don't walk around with a crown with no loyalty and only care about money," Stephen retorted. Monica's figure started to blur. The light from her lantern had interfered with mental energy, and this effect was doubled with the miasma drifting through the ruins. Stephen kept his distance. He'd already experienced her lantern's effects once, and he wasn't interested in falling into a trance again. A horde of rats drilled through the cracks on the ground and approached Monica like a tidal wave. She was beyond disgusted. "Did you just summon these disgusting things?" She swung her lantern at the rats, releasing a blade of aura to kill the critters. She didn't notice that they were carrying artillery shells. At the moment of the explosion, the threadworms condensed a protective layer of iron sand over Stephen and the Sky Lion. The participants who were watching from the sidelines had to run to safety to avoid ending up as collateral damage. Even the participants who were standing far away staggered from the impact. The artillery shells bombarded a deep crater in the earth, but Monica wasn't affected. At the last second, she'd transformed her lantern into a barrier to protect herself. She found it strange that the temperature was still rising, even though the explosions were over. When the flames brushed against her barrier, they burned a hole and scalded her skin. If she stayed on the ground, she'd be burned to death. There was so much dust that Monica couldn't see what was going on around her, but she leaped into the air to escape the heat. Stephen had been waiting for this. He'd mixed some of the flames from the furnace into the fire from the explosions, making it too hot to stay on the ground. His clones threw out their chains. They wrapped around Monica, stopping her from flying any higher. While she was bound, Stephen removed the lid from the furnace and stuck her in the head. The impact rattled Monica's brain, and her vision blurred. Blood dripped down her face. Unlike Monica, Tobias wasn't unscathed from the explosion. His barrier of energy had limited protection compared to her lantern. He was covered in wounds, and he wouldn't make it in time to save her. He yelled for the other mercenaries to step in. Monica was supposed to be the new city lord. If she was killed, their efforts would have been for nothing. There was a big gap between her and Stephen's cultivations, but he'd somehow managed to outsmart her. As the mercenaries ran over, the Sky Lion transformed. Its original form was massive, and it blocked the mercenaries from going any further. When Stephen's clones released their chains and Monica fell, the Sky Lion's tail slammed her into the ground with a force that shook the earth. She didn't die immediately, but many of her bones had been broken. She couldn't even struggle to stand up. The Sky Lion flew over and swallowed Monica's body. Her life force was extinguished instantly. The Sky Lion's gruesome method was more shocking than when it had revealed its colossal form. The mercenaries were rooted to the ground in stunned silence. The 5 wealthy heirs had watched the entire battle. They were just as shocked as the mercenaries. They'd heard rumors about Stephen. He was lazy and opportunistic, and he never spent more than a day cultivating. They weren't expecting him to be so skilled. Alyssa was impressed. Let's invite him to join us. We have far more to offer than the Sullivan family. Money, fame, and power, he can have it all. I heard he's not interested in the city lord position, Holden said. That's not important. We need to pass the second round, and he can help us. Alyssa wasn't just interested in Stephen's brain. She wanted his beasts. The City Lord Challenge was going on for more than a week, and none of the beasts had been killed. They were a formidable team. Holden hadn't gotten over their defeat, and he wasn't as open to the idea of recruiting a competitor. Talk to him first. If he's respectful and willing to cooperate with us, we could consider having him join us. Rodri and Alyssa went over to Stephen with friendly smiles. You're swift and decisive, Rodri praised. If we had you on our team, we can fight the Ghost General together. There's a mine with top-grade fire crystals 200 miles to the south of the Haven Domain, Alyssa said. It can be used to forge weapons and other equipment. If you don't have a use for them, you can sell them. If you agree to work with us, we'll transfer the ownership of the mine to you. Ordinary tycoons left the house with cash or checks. Wealthy cultivators who were successors to their family, like Rodri and Alyssa, brought all kinds of contracts with them. They were prepared to do business anytime and anywhere. Stephen turned them down politely. Thank you for your offer, but I've already agreed to work with the Sullivan family. We're not asking you to choose us over them, Rodri explained. We want you to help us kill the Ghost General. The mine is a small gift compared to the City Lord position. We won't use it against you during the third round. The conditions were flexible and generous. Stephen didn't see any reason to refuse. It was only a temporary alliance for the second round. I'll accept, but during our cooperation, I'd like you to ensure the Sullivan family's safety. After that, whatever happens during the third round will be left up to fate. Rodri and Alyssa agreed. The Sullivan family had a small team. Whether they made it to the third round or not wouldn't make a difference. They handed Stephen a property contract with golden embroidery. It was complete with emblems of the top 4 wealthy families in the Haven Domain and required signatures. Stephen's signature was the only thing missing to seal the contract. He carefully looked it over and signed his name. The 5 heirs decided to take a break for 48 hours to come up with a strategy. They didn't tell Stephen to keep the contract a secret because it wasn't realistic to hide it from so many participants. There were already witnesses. When Stephen regrouped with the Sullivan family, he told them honestly. Fiona was envious of their wealth. The Sullivan family was rich, but even they couldn't give away a mine at the drop of a hat. The Sky Domain wasn't as big as the Haven Domain, and there was a gap between their wealth. Dante understood the big picture. If they worked together with the wealthy families, they would have a higher chance of defeating the Ghost General. As long as they passed the second round, there would be hope of maintaining their position. As the battle raged on in the stone forest, the miasma in the ruins lessened. There was nothing to do, so Stephen decided to accompany the Sky Lion to the edge of the abyss and meet the strange beast hidden in the depths. It had extended an invitation to the Sky Lion, and it would come for him sooner or later. Most of the participants were gathered on the mountain, and very few would venture this close to the abyss. No one would bother them here. Stephen tossed a ball of fire into the darkness. Through the momentary lighting, he saw a cluster of black shadows clinging to the wall beneath the cliff. They didn't move when the ball of fire passed by. Stephen was about to say something when one of the shadows shifted. It extended its thin and long limbs. Through the miasma, he saw 8 tentacles attached to a round body as big as a truck. There were thousands of glowing patterns of eyes on its exterior. The sky lion's instinctive reaction was fear. He couldn't sense the spider's aura, but its presence made him nervous. Get ready to run. I don't want to fight that thing. The beast leaped out of the abyss and landed gracefully at the edge of the cliff in the form of a young woman with a devastatingly beautiful face. She was dressed in a purple silk dress. A hypnotic pattern in the shape of an eye had been embroidered onto the fabric. When her dress fluttered in the wind, the pattern created a wave of mental interference. The other cultivators try to avoid the abyss, but you two are different. Why are you here? Before the challenge, there was a beast in the abyss who spoke to me, the Sky Lion said. Were you companions? You could say that. We want you to help us migrate to a different realm suitable for cultivation. Our ancestors are connected, so there's no reason for you to refuse. The woman explained that the beasts were currently in the Asura realm weren't the original inhabitants. In ancient times, there was an era where the Bestia and Revenant realms overlapped. There were many animals who came in contact with creatures in the Revenant realm. Their species intertwined and gave birth to the most primitive ancestors of beasts. However, the existence of these beasts was forbidden, and they weren't allowed to stay in the Bestia or the Revenant realms. They were fated to a life of hiding in fear. Some of the stronger beasts were able to shatter spatial barriers and escape to other realms. This was the origin of the beasts in the Asura realm. The Sky Lion didn't know what to make of this. The woman's companions were probably a forbidden race who didn't have the ability to break through the spatial barriers. But it was in a beast's best nature to fight and kill. What if the woman and her companions tried to kill Killian and take over the Asura realm? Why are you hesitating? The woman prompted. If you let us join you, we'll add to your strength. During the ancient war in the Elysian realm, a small spatial rift was created at the bottom of the abyss. There aren't that many of us who can suppress our cultivation and cross over. We need your help. I can't make the decision on my own, the Sky Lion said. Then let me introduce you to the leader of the Asura realm. The Sky Lion hesitated. Negotiations were Killian's forte, not his. He turned to Stephen for help. Stephen didn't think the woman's request was that difficult because neither he nor the Sky Lion could make any decisive decisions. We can relay your requests to the celestial beast on your behalf, but if he agrees to meet with you, however the discussion turns out, you'll have to promise to maintain a respectful attitude and not start a war just because of a disagreement. That's easy enough, the woman said. We went through a lot of trouble to come here to find someone who could help us. Starting a fight would only cause needless casualties. Stephen glanced at the Sky Lion for his opinion, but he didn't say anything. He just looked worried. It'll be okay, Stephen said, transmitting his voice to the Sky Lion. You and I both know what Killian is capable of, and if he really thinks these beasts are dangerous, he can also refuse. We should go along with them for the time being. The last thing we want is for them to go after you. As a token of appreciation, the woman offered up an array to minimize the effects of the miasma. 48 hours passed in a flash. Stephen and the 5 heirs prepared to enter the stone forest. Aside from the wealthy family's subordinates and the Sullivan family, no one dared to approach them. The heirs had made it clear that if anyone bothered them, they wouldn't hesitate to kill them. As they stepped into the forest, the smell of blood grew stronger. The ground was dyed red, but there were no bodies. The 3-headed dog had swallowed them all. The Ghost General recognized Stephen and the heirs. Are you back for another round? You should have run while you had the chance. Holden stepped forward. Don't think you're invincible. Even if we fail, the Zenith Council will eliminate you and your beast. This is a cycle you should be familiar with. The Ghost General stiffened. He and the dog were created by the prisoner's negative energy. They couldn't stray too far from the prison or exist for too long. With Holden's provocation, the next battle began. Stephen hid in the distance, watching the heirs take the lead. They had each been assigned different responsibilities before entering the forest. Stephen was in charge of suppressing the miasma and dealing the finishing blow. Half of the crowd targeted the three-headed dog first, but despite their teamwork, they failed to leave a single scratch on the beast. The others set up an array of golden swords that arranged themselves into a ring, circling above the ghost general. He threw out his chain, and it knocked the array out of range, but the swords quickly spiraled back into position, condensing a shower of golden symbols above. Stephen watched as the heirs and their subordinates took out porcelain bottles of what he assumed to be concoctions that restored the energy they consumed to set up the array and keep it active. Someone in the crowd tossed an ancient mirror towards the dog. It released an explosive light that stunned it momentarily. Fiona tossed out her massive ancient bell. It rang with a clear and melodious sound. As the sound wave passed through the forest, everything within range was turned to dust. The ghost general threw his chain on the ground. It was adorned with rings with a set of claws attached to its ends. The chain had developed its own consciousness long ago, and the ghost general didn't need to wield it. Up until now, he'd been personally killing the participants with the chain because he enjoyed the thrill of the kill and took pleasure in the terror of his victims before they died. The chain swirled around the ghost general and dispersed the sound waves from Fiona's bell. The crowd infused more energy into the array, and golden symbols fell from the circle of swords like snow. When the symbols landed on the ghost general, his armor began to melt, and his skin turned ashen. The symbols were absorbing his spiritual energy. The crowd thought victory was within reach until a vortex appeared above them. The surrounding miasma was drawn into the spiral to replenish the ghost general's energy. Stephen activated the array that the beasts in the abyss had set up. Rays of light shone from the depths and formed a barrier over the abyss, blocking the miasma from seeping through. The ghost general was annoyed that his technique had been interrupted. He grabbed the bell and tossed it into the crowd. Everyone scattered as dust and smoke spewed into the air. The three-headed dog was freed from its paralysis and chased after them to protect its master. Grayson and Todd darted in front of the dog and condensed phantoms to take it down. The amount of miasma in the area had been weakened, and the ghost general couldn't continue providing his energy to the dog, but it had devoured many participants over the past few days. It was capable of fending off two cultivators on its own. Neither side could gain the upper hand. Stephen slipped out of the forest and made his way to the edge of the abyss. A glowing film spanned the opening of the depths. Miasma accumulated inside. The woman in a purple dress was sitting on a rock near the edge with her legs crossed. I don't know why you're so desperate to go against that being of negative energy when he's so much stronger than you. It might be meaningless to you, but it's a necessity for me, Stephen said. Why do you want to settle down in the Asura realm instead of the Elysian realm? You're already here. There are too many cultivators in the Elysian realm. We are a forbidden existence, and they have a history of eliminating those who don't belong. Living with beasts in the Asura realm is safer. It sounded like the woman and her companions could adapt to any environment. Why would they go to so much trouble to cross over to an unfamiliar realm, just to ask the Sky Lion to take them to the Asura realm? Before Stephen could ask, he heard the sounds of conflict approaching. The ghost general was rushing towards the edge of the abyss. Why do you look so concerned? The woman asked. There's a big crowd running after him. They should be able to stop him. The miasma had lessened, and the other participants who'd been waiting on the sidelines had joined the fray when they spotted the ghost general leaving the stone forest. Stephen wasn't as optimistic as the woman. The ghost general's chain was sweeping through the crowd, tearing the participants to shreds. The three-headed dog didn't have time to enjoy the feast. It attacked the participants as much as it could to buy the ghost general time to make it to the abyss. Within minutes, the ghost general landed in front of Stephen and the woman. So it was you two hindering the flow of the miasma. I hope you're prepared to pay with your lives. It won't be that easy. I have many beasts on my side, Stephen threatened as he threw a meaningful look at that woman. He was exaggerating. The Sky Lion and the other beasts from the Asura realm were strong, but Stephen would never risk their lives against a being like the Ghost General. His only option was the woman and her companions. The woman frowned. I'm not fond of being used by others. Consider this as doing me a favor. Passing on your request to the Celestial Beast is a separate issue. If you help me defeat the Ghost General, I'll repay you in the future, Stephen promised. He didn't know what the woman would ask of him, but if he didn't kill the Ghost General now, every participant would be wiped out. The woman wasn't thrilled, but she gave in. She put in a lot of effort, and she couldn't let it go to waste. She waved her hand and covered the ghost general in a shimmering silver spider web. A phantom of a tentacle wrapped around his body and tightened, preventing him from breaking free of the binds. He struggled, but it was useless. The dog tried to tear the threads with its teeth and claws, but nothing worked. The web was inescapable. The participants swarmed towards the edge of the abyss and attacked the ghost general and the three-headed dog in unison. Another tentacle shattered the chain and flung its rings over the crowd. As the participants raced to snatch an item from the sky, Stephen picked up a ring that had rolled to stop by his feet. When he touched it, the chill made his hair stand on end. The ghost general's residual power pulsed inside. As chaos ensued, the 5 heirs stood to the side, throwing Stephen cautious looks. I heard he brought 100 beasts with him to the challenge, but he had more in the abyss. His cultivation is low, but he makes up for it in other ways. He'll definitely be an annoyance during the 3rd round. There are no rules in the arena. Participants are allowed to bring as many mounts as they want. If he summons all the beasts on his side, would there even be room for the participants to stand on the platform? It's unrealistic for the Zenith Council to add restrictions. We're already at the end of the 2nd round. What if we bribe Stephen with money? He's not interested. We need something more enticing. The 5 heirs looked at each other. What could they possibly offer Stephen that was more tempting than the City Lord position? There's still hope. He's helping the Sullivan family regain their position in Minori City, but the position in Seaflower City is up for grabs. Stephen watched the participants fight over the Ghost General's items. The Ghost General and the 3-headed dog had been killed, and the battle had turned into a free-for-all between the participants. "Thank you for your help," the woman chuckled. "You know I didn't do it for free. Are you ready to hear what I want?" "It hasn't been long since I ascended to the Elysian realm. My cultivation is low, but I'll do my best to help you with whatever it is you need." "Let me think about it. I'll tell you later when I come up with something." Outside the prison, the elders, warden, and guards had all watched the participants kill their targets for the 2nd round. There were around 300 participants who'd obtained an item from the Ghost General, and 500 others who were waiting for an opportunity to steal from them. There were too many participants left. If they threw them into the arena, the 3rd round would take too long. They decided to give the participants time to recover while they came up with new rules. The Lord of Abysm City had arranged for his subordinates to pick up the participants who passed the 2nd round and bring them back to the city, where they would wait for the host to announce the date of the final round. Ever since Stephen returned to the hotel, he felt like someone was watching him. A waiter stopped him outside his room and told him that he had 5 heirs hosting a party in the lobby. He was invited. "Sorry, tell them I need to concentrate on cultivating." Stephen politely turned down the invitation and strolled into his room with purpose. As soon as he closed the door behind him, he lazily sprawled on the couch. Minutes later, the Sky Lion flew into the room through the window. "The 3rd round is going to be a fight to the death. Are you sure you want to participate?" "I'm almost there. Why would I give up now?" "Because the wealthy families are stronger than you think. I was watching the fight from the Ghost General from a distance, and it's not safe for the beast to participate. We won't be able to help you or the Sullivan family in the 3rd round." In the evening, Nadorun led his team through the dense forest surrounding Abysm City. With so many people around Stephen during the 2nd round, they didn't have a chance to ambush him. But now he was alone at the hotel. He had a horde of beasts as his allies, but what beast would stay by his side 24 hours a day? If he had any beasts with him at night, it would be the ones in his spiritual world, and there weren't that many of them. As night fell, Stephen finally had time to cultivate for once after the Sky Lion left. The Sky Lion told him that the sword array the wealthy family had set up was dangerous to beasts. If the beasts participated in the 3rd round, it would be hard for the Sky Lion to look out for them. He was their temporary leader, and he had a responsibility to bring them back to the Asura realm safely. Stephen understood the Sky Lion's concerns. He was already grateful that the beast had helped protect the Sullivan family for 2 rounds. Stephen was about to enter a meditative state when he felt someone's gaze on him. The mercenaries and the Asuras had been wiped out. He suspected it was the wealthy families. Stephen didn't have time to guess. The window shattered, and he leaned back just as the sword grazed his neck. The attack had been steady, accurate, and ruthless. The culprit wasn't an ordinary cultivator. A group of familiar faces appeared in the room. It was Nadorun and his team. They lunged for him without a word. Stephen materialized his sword, and the trajectories of their attacks filled his mind. With the Ghost Fire's guidance, he was able to narrowly avoid each strike. He didn't have much time to cultivate these days, but he was steadily improving with every battle he fought. Stephen created 3 clones. 4 of them shuffled around the room before jumping out of the window. Nadorun's team didn't know if they should keep fighting or chase after them. The clones were identical to Stephen's main body, and they couldn't tell them apart. They didn't have a chance to decide before the 2 figures that looked like Stephen attacked. Nadorun grabbed their swords with 1 hand each, while his team finished them off. The 2 of them disappeared into wisps of smoke, indicating that they were clones. The real Stephen had escaped through the window. Nadorun looked outside into the darkness. He couldn't sense Stephen's aura anywhere. Forget it. We have more important things to do. We need to detonate the underground cells. There's been a lot of visitors in the city lately, a member of his team said. If there's any sign of trouble at the Infinite Prison, they won't just sit back and watch. Nadorun was adamant. We've been preparing for this. It has to be done regardless of the risks. If we stir up a commotion at the prison, the City Lord challenge will be delayed. Everyone will be too busy paying attention to the consequences to care about us. Stephen watched Nadorun's team leap out the window and disappear into the night. They were gone for now, but there was no guarantee they wouldn't come back. As long as he was in the Elysian realm, he would be a target. At the Infinite Prison, the warden was pulling an all-nighter in his office. The past few days hadn't been easy. The City Lord Challenge was none of his business, but because it was held at the prison this year, he had to support the Zenith Council as much as possible. At least this would soon be over. There was only 1 more round to go. The warden's subordinate entered the office to report. We've been monitoring the participants during the first and second rounds, and from the conversations we've overheard, the mercenaries have some contact with the ancient cultivators, but there's no evidence. The ancient cultivators are participating in the challenge? The warden asked. Why? Does their captain want to become a city lord? Have they interacted with any other participant? We're not sure, his subordinate replied. The mercenaries are dead, and we haven't heard anyone else mention them. Increase the number of teams on patrol. No one is allowed to enter the prison at this time. Late into the night, Nadorun's team made it back to the Infinite Prison's vicinity. The Zodiac Rat had created thousands of clones of itself. They scuttled through the streets and alleys of Abysm City before one of them finally found traces of the ancient cultivators leading to the edge of the abyss. They're observing the prison, the rat reported to Stephen. I think they're about to sneak in. Is that really possible? They say the Infinite Prison is impenetrable. No one has ever escaped alive. Before the first round, Stephen had researched the prison to prepare for the challenge. Several hundred years ago, there were frequent attacks on the prison. The prisoners detained were members of dangerous factions across the realm, and their superiors wanted them back. To deter any more attacks, the authorities had killed the trespassers and the prisoners they'd tried to save. There hadn't been another attack since. We're about to find out, the rat said, watching Nadorun's team jump over the walls and dash towards the prison. The number of guards had increased, but not all of them were as strong as the warden's closest subordinates. The guards were alerted when they sensed one of their companions' life forces disappear. They took immediate action and sealed the gates. The warden looked out the window to scan the premises for any sign of the intruder. As his gaze swept the field, an explosion erupted. The explosives buried underground could be triggered by external forces if their exact location was known. Nadorun had embedded his sword into the soil, releasing his energy in waves through the ground. The explosion destroyed the chains connecting the underground compartment with the rest of the prison. The cells rattled as the compartment slid down the cliff and into the abyss. Nadorun's team was surprised by how easy it had been. If they didn't place too much importance on the prisoners' lives, detonating the prison was a simple task. All they needed to do now was escape. Then they would wait and see if any of the prisoners were lucky enough to survive and climb out of the abyss. If someone really did survive, they would find a way to contact them. The warden flew out of the shaking office and questioned the guards angrily. Was it a cultivator or a beast? We're conducting a search around the premises. Anyone we don't recognize will kill on sight. Starting with the chain of explosions and ending with the fall of the metallic compartment into the abyss, the process took less than 30 seconds. The sturdiest material had been used to construct the compartment, and it wasn't possible for a cultivator to catch and pull it up. As the warden watched his guards swarm around the prison, he prayed that the culprits were caught. If not, his career would be over. The rat's clone climbed on top of a tree. NATO Run's team had moved so fast that they had lost track of them. The central compartment fell into the abyss. There's nothing left of the cells. Did you see any prisoners escape? Stephen asked. Not yet. There are hundreds of guards searching the area. I heard them say they'll kill anyone unfamiliar they see on sight. As Stephen wondered how this would affect the rest of the City Lord challenge, he saw a group of familiar faces flying out of the city. It was the elders from the Zenith Council, the Lord of Abysm City, and elite cultivators from the city guards. The warden didn't have to notify them for them to know what had happened. The explosions and flames in the direction of the prison were enough for them to make an accurate deduction. It was a sleepless night for every participant. They didn't leave the city to assist in the search. They had to conserve their energy to prepare for the final round. At dawn, Stephen went down to the hotel lobby for breakfast and to gather information. Fiona waved at him enthusiastically from a table by the window. Did you hear about what happened last night? The challenge can't continue. How do you know? Stephen asked. The prisoners fell into the abyss, but how does that affect the challenge? Attacking the infinite prison is equivalent to challenging the Elysian Realm's order. The martial arts faction's priority isn't selecting a new city lord from Minori City or Seaflower City. It's restoring their reputation by catching the culprit and constructing a new prison. The abrupt end to the City Lord challenge worked in the Sullivan family's favor. Minori City and Seaflower City couldn't be left without a leader during this tumultuous time. The former City Lords would temporarily regain their authority. This was good news for Stephen. He wasn't sure what would have happened to him or the Sullivan family if the third round had taken place as planned. That's good to hear. So what's happening now? There's going to be a commission posted at the city gate. Providing clues of the culprit's whereabouts earns you 100 million purple gold coins. If you assist in capturing the culprit or capture them yourself, the reward will increase tenfold. The same discussion was happening among participants at other tables. At noon, an official announcement from the Zenith Council was posted at the city gate. The third round of the City Lord Challenge would be postponed indefinitely, and everyone, including participants with an item from the Ghost General, were invited to register for the commission. Abysm City was rarely this busy. The warden and the guards had come to discuss countermeasures with the City Lord and Zenith Council. They'd searched for hours since the explosion, but there was no trace of the culprit. The dense miasma made it hard to sense the presence of trespassers with their auras. Maybe the culprit had already run away. It was meaningless to search the prison's vicinity any further. It would be better to hire more manpower and expand the range of the search. None of them thought manpower was the issue, but they had to do something. And having more people searching would hopefully intimidate the culprit. What should we do about the City Lord challenge? The 2 City Lord positions are still empty. We could make capturing the culprit an additional requirement for the third round. That's a bit risky. Not just anyone could have detonated the prison. It doesn't matter if the participants are killed. The casualty rate during the third round is high to begin with. After a unanimous agreement, the rules were announced. The first participant to take action were those with extensive backgrounds. Their money, manpower, and intelligence network put them ahead of everyone else. As for Stephen, he wasn't interested. Even if the beasts helped him find the ancient cultivators, there wouldn't be any evidence of their crime. And if he wasn't careful, they would kill him before he even had the opportunity to tell the Zenith Council and the warden their whereabouts. Fiona was a member of the Sullivan family, so she didn't need to participate in the challenge. Before the third round, she was planning on cultivating and aiming for a breakthrough to the next rank. The beasts won't be around to help you during the third round, Stephen warned. Take care of yourself. His and the beasts' withdrawal from the challenge had unknowingly alleviated a lot of pressure on the hosts. With more than 100 fewer participants, the third round would be much shorter. Thank you for everything you've done, Fiona said.
You and the beast have eliminated most of the difficult opponents. If we're able to maintain our position, we'll reward you accordingly. Don't mention it. The final outcome will be up to you and your family. The remaining participants were divided into groups and went their separate ways. They were everywhere outside the city. Stephen left the city alone and met up with the Sky Lion and a small group of beasts from the Asura realm. The warden sealed off the abyss, the Sky Lion said. They're trying to see if anyone's hiding beyond the miasma. How are we going to get in contact with those spiders? There's no rush. They came all the way to the Elysian realm just to find you. For one reason or another, they're desperate to meet Killian face to face. If what you're saying is true, they'll be useful allies. For the time being, stay in the area and wait for them to reach out to you. The Sky Lion's eyes narrowed. You sound oddly calm about this. There's no guarantee they'll keep their promise. If you bring them to the Asura realm and another war breaks out, don't think you can get away without taking responsibility. You have to help us. Don't worry. You, me, and Killian are a team. We'll fight together like old times. The Sky Lion was still skeptical about the plan, but he left with the other beasts to wait for an opportunity to contact the beast from the Bestia realm. But that wasn't the last of Stephen's problems. He had one more issue to take care of before heading back to the human realm. Tristan and Thierry's clones were waiting for him at the hotel in the Haven domain. It didn't matter how strong they'd all gotten, Luciano wasn't to be trifled with. When Stephen went to find them at the hotel, they looked less than pleased that he was only just returning now. It had been more than 2 weeks since they'd last seen each other. The Ares clone had suspected that Stephen was killed during the first and second rounds. He had even debated storming into the Mystic Covenant's headquarters for an explanation. Fortunately, Tristan was around to stop him. The City Lord challenge wasn't broadcasted to the public. Tristan and the Ares clone could only hear rumors here and there about it. Now that Stephen had come back, they could at least confirm that he was alive. You've wasted so much of my time, the Ares clone accused. Let's get going. Take us to Luciano's residence. Okay, but like I told you before, he's stronger than all of us combined. Be prepared to lose your life, Stephen said. It doesn't matter. I was created for this reason. Stephen glanced at Tristan. He seemed to be on board with whatever brilliant idea the Ares clone had. Stephen sighed and led them to the outskirts of the Haven domain. He'd been there once, so he was familiar with the safest route to take. They passed through forests, swamps, and deserts before finally making it to the garden. The dense spiritual energy and the herbal fragrance made Tristan a little disoriented. He wasn't an ascender, and the overflowing spiritual energy in the area was overwhelming. Stephen was hesitating in front of the garden when Luciano's student emerged from the forest. His gaze was immediately drawn to Thierry's clone. I underestimated you. I can't believe you found someone who looks exactly like the astral thief. I don't suppose they're twins. It's a long story, Stephen said. He patiently explained the crystal coffin in the lapis lazuli tower. Luciano's student's brows furrowed. The Ares' main body had lost some of his memories and had become a gardener. This was the most effective way to make him give up on his old profession. The Ares clone would be ruining Luciano's efforts if he took his main body away. The astral thief has committed many crimes. My teacher has already shown him mercy by letting him live. The Ares clone's aura filled with the air as he drew his sword. He had no plans to abandon his main body. If he couldn't save him, then he would die trying. His sword had been forged with special materials. It was flexible and could be bent at every angle. When he struck, the blade extended and swept towards Luciano's student from different directions, making its trajectory unpredictable. Luciano's student looked young, but in terms of seniority, he was slightly higher than the elders, sentry guards, and even the faction leader at the Mystic Covenant. He didn't think it was appropriate to take out his weapon to deal with the clone. He faced the flexible sword head-on with his fist. The impact forced him to take a few steps back. Not bad. You're stronger than I thought. I was holding back because I didn't want to ruin the garden, but if you don't hand over my main body, I'll raze this house and the entire plantation to the ground, the Ares clone threatened. You talk big. Didn't Stephen tell you about the unique herbs we plant here? A single plant can rip you to pieces. The Ares clone wasn't deterred.
He wasn't made of flesh and blood. The injuries he'd sustained from Luciano's student had already healed. Stephen watched with Tristan on the sidelines as another fierce fight broke out. Luciano's students packed a powerful punch, but the Ares clone's sword slipped through the cracks between blows and took advantage of the opening. Stephen had never seen Thierry fight at full strength. His clone wasn't as strong as his main body, but it possessed most of his cultivation and experience. After witnessing firsthand what he was capable of, Stephen's evaluation of him had gone up. As Luciano's student and Thierry's clone increased their speed, the distance between them gradually closed. When they collided, a storm of sand and stones covered the sky. Luciano's student was surprised that Thierry's clone was still standing. A normal opponent's bones would have been shattered. Stephen wasn't sure how their fight would end up. It was clear that Luciano's student wasn't going all out. He hadn't even taken out his weapon. At that moment, the door to the wooden house in the forest by the lake opened, and Luciano stepped out. He took a seat in the shade beneath a tree, gave Stephen a nod as a greeting, and turned away to watch the fight. It looked like he had no intention of stopping them. Luciano's appearance didn't go unnoticed. In the blink of an eye, the Ares clone was in front of him. "Old man, are you Luciano?" "Yes, I am." "Let the astral thief go. Otherwise, don't blame me for what happens next." Luciano's student was seething at the disrespectful way Thierry's clone was speaking to his teacher. He had been careless and let Thierry's clone slip past him. He compressed an explosive swirl of energy on his palm and lunged. At the last second, Thierry's clone vanished into thin air. The shadows of the plants and trees reflected on the ground began to shift. Stephen was familiar with this technique. Thierry's clone had merged with his shadow and hidden inside the two-dimensional space. His aura had disappeared, but Luciano's students knew he was still there. Luciano's student placed his hand on the ground, and a dazzling light spread across the garden, illuminating everything within until not a single shadow was left. "There's nowhere to hide. Come out before you accidentally touch the roots and poison yourself." Stephen held Tristan back when he was about to join the fray. "You're not an ascender. Charging in recklessly will get you killed." "So you want me to stand here and watch my teacher's clone get killed?" Tristan demanded. "Luciano is the strongest person here. We need to wait for him to make his decision." Tristan looked at Luciano, who was sitting in the distance. He couldn't sense his aura, probably because there was a gap between their cultivations, but he could feel the depth of an ocean inside him. Luciano was calm on the surface, but on the inside, he was a sea of raging undercurrents. The Ares clone leaped out of the ground and rushed at Luciano's student. When the tip of his sword was inches away, Luciano's student lowered his hands, as if he'd given up on defending. The Ares clone didn't have time to contemplate whether it was a trap or not. He locked onto Luciano's student's chest and went in for the kill. All of a sudden, roots shot out of Luciano's student's sleeves and bound the sword in place. He was surprised by the force the Ares clone was exerting on the blade. He thought it would be easy to snatch his sword, but it was as firm and steady as a mountain. The roots couldn't absorb spiritual energy from the sword for more than a few seconds before Luciano's student had to let go. He knew there was something unique about the Ares clone's body, so he didn't plan on restraining him through brute force. The Ares clone was fast, but the roots were faster. In a split second, he was bundled in roots. Luciano slowly stood up and dusted his clothes. "His body is unusual, but we can bury him in the garden as fertilizer. He'll decompose, and the plants will absorb his spiritual energy." Stephen hurried over. "Mr. Luciano, can you give him a chance and hear him out?" Luciano gave Stephen a cold look. "This is a world where the strong are respected. Someone like you with a lower cultivation shouldn't provoke others so casually." Stephen was about to say more when the Ares clone's body underwent an inconceivable transformation. His skin cracked, and a clear liquid gushed out from between his flesh and bones. Luciano's student was stunned. He had tried to bind the Ares clone, but the roots couldn't contain his liquid form. The Ares clone slipped past the roots and reformed in the air. Ripples spanned his liquefied, transparent body. "Just because you're strong doesn't mean you can do as you please. I don't need to kill you two to win." "You'd better get down before you regret it," Luciano's student warned. He circulated his energy, gearing up for another round. The Ares clone ignored him. He simply tossed a pile of heavy, metallic contraptions on the ground. They sank 3 inches into the dirt, but nothing happened after that. Luciano and his students were confused. The metallic contraptions didn't look like weapons. Were they some kind of seed? Why was he scattering them here? Stephen cursed as he realized what the Aerie was trying to do. He quickly grabbed Tristan and leaped into the air before summoning the ice dragon. Luciano and his students looked up at him in bewilderment. "Where are you going?" "Get off the ground!" Stephen called out. Thankfully, Luciano and his students listened to his warning and joined him in the air. He had no idea when Thierry's clone had stolen this many artillery shells from the human realm, but now wasn't the time to question him. "You don't have time to stop him before he triggers the explosion. You two can withstand it, but you'll lose your garden." The garden was Luciano and his students' treasure. They'd planted herbs from other realms, and some of the species had already gone extinct. If the garden went up in flames, they would never be able to recreate it. Even though Thierry was just a clone, he'd retained his cunning mind. "I've attached my liquid to every explosive. If you don't want me to burn your garden down, bring me the astral thief." Luciano's student dashed into the wooden house and reappeared with Thierry. Thierry's eyes were dull and unfocused, but aside from that, he hadn't changed much. In fact, he seemed to be living a more comfortable life than before. Thierry's clone lit up at the sight of his main body. He turned into a stream of water and disappeared inside him. Memories rushed into Thierry's mind. His backup plan, in case he was ever killed, had served its purpose today. He laughed wildly, feeling alive and himself again. "It must have been hard to take care of me for so long. I'll definitely be back to repay the favor." Thierry turned into a streak of light and disappeared into the horizon. He regained his memories and absorbed the clone's spiritual energy. Now that he was in peak condition again, Luciano and his student didn't try to stop him. There were also explosives scattered over the ground to worry about. They could only watch as Thierry ran off. Stephen was dumbfounded. Thierry had left him and Tristan behind, leaving them to clean up his mess. Luciano's student began the difficult task of gathering the artillery shells and disabling them to prevent accidental explosions, as Stephen apologized for the trouble Thierry had caused. Luciano waved his hand dismissively. "I won't kill you. You're a member of the Mystic Covenant, so I'll overlook it this time, but don't let it happen again." Stephen felt like the clouds had lifted and the sun had risen. His mood brightened. For a second, he was certain that Luciano was going to kill him and Tristan to make up for Thierry's escape. Stephen took out a sample of the ancient plant virus he'd taken from Dr. Dalton's lab. "Would you be able to tell me what this is? The ancient cultivators made it. It's a virus created from an ancient plant." Luciano knew what it was with one glance. It made him curious about the advanced research instruments in the human realm. The virus had been preserved in liquids stored in a test tube. He was familiar with all kinds of herbs, including ancient plants. He could sense the presence of the tricorpse grass, but humans had invented the technology that could observe specimens at a molecular level to identify it. The tricorpse grass is toxic, but its effects are limited when combined with viruses from the human realm. The ancient cultivators are known for their strength, but they're amateurs when it comes to herbs. "Is there a cure?" Stephen asked. When Luciano was on his quest to taste every kind of herb in the world, he'd lived in the human realm for thousands of years. He knew how weak the realm was. Survival and extinction were a natural progression. He didn't care what happened to the human realm, but he couldn't resist Stephen's pestering. "You bring trouble with you every time you visit, and I'm always the one to give you gifts. In this world, no one except you would dare to be so bold." Luciano handed Stephen a gem. "Insert this into the cane I gave you. Its purification effects aren't that strong, but it should be enough to deal with the virus." "Thank you, Mr. Luciano. I'm not someone who doesn't know how to repay kindness when it's given." Stephen gestured to the pile of mechanical parts next to Luciano's student. "If you'd like, I can give you a blueprint for these weapons. Experimenting with them could be an entertaining hobby to pass the time." Luciano waved his hand and threw Stephen out of the garden with a gust of wind. He had no interest in strife or conflict. What would he need so many weapons for? "The Elysian realm is more entertaining than the human realm," Tristan said once they were back in the desert. "I'm going to follow my teacher and train with him." "You're not an ascender. It'll be dangerous.
The Ares name is still on the wanted list. You never know when the Mystic Covenant will track him down. If you're by his side, they'll think you're his accomplice. The fate of a thief is to live life on the edge of a blade. Thanks for helping my teacher. Take care. We'll meet again in the future. With those parting words, Tristan disappeared into the sandstorm. Back in the human realm, the ice dragon flew from the west to the east along the northern border. There was no sign of war, only fortresses and miles of peaceful scenery. Where is everyone? Stephen asked. Did the war end in less than a month? Maybe the military's upper management is negotiating with the enemy, the ice dragon said. That's possible. There's 2 ancient cultivators in Warhawk, and there's a limit to what Ren's students can do. Resolving this peacefully would make things easier. The tense atmosphere at the military administration building was washed away when Stephen returned. He was the backbone of the country. There were no battles that couldn't be won with him around. Thank you for all your hard work, Stephen said, taking his seat at the head of the table in the conference room. It couldn't have been easy to defend our country when our 2 borders are under attack. The Leviathan unit's leader welcomed him back and gave him a rundown of the situation. With Ren's students in the country, Mifflin, Warhawk, and their allies had mostly stationed their troops near the border just for show. The war had reached a stalemate. Warhawk and their allies were receiving resources from Mifflin's government, but there was a limited supply, and it was almost used up. Valuable weapons, equipment, and other supplies had to be shipped from home. The Leviathan unit's leader had asked the 9 States Financial Group to drop underwater mines and disrupt the transportation route that Warhawk and the allies frequently used. The area was currently under investigation and sealed off to the public. The glaring disadvantage had prompted some of the smaller countries to side with the U.S. instead of Warhawk and establish a stable trading route to express their sincerity. While Warhawk and their allies' army were in a bind because of the lack of resources, Mifflin had sent a team to assassinate the Guardians of the Palace at the Hidden Commander Center on the Aratai Mountains. It resulted in a crushing defeat of Mifflin's troops. The mountains were sealed off by landmines, but the Leviathan unit had infiltrated the cities near Lake Isaiah a while back. Wiping out the enemy was a piece of cake. Should we send a delegation to Mifflin to negotiate conditions for a truce? The Leviathan unit's leader asked. What do Warhawk and the allies think? The commanders and soldiers have mixed opinions, but Warhawk's allies want to leave before supplies run out. Before you came back, Mifflin was hoping that Warhawk could share their military technology with their factories and produce weapons and equipment on the spot to provide continuous support to the army. But the patents didn't belong to the Parliament. They're in the hands of the military's higher-ups. They're businessmen, and their priority is money, not the country. They would never give away their precious technology to help a small country like Mifflin. Let's hold off on the delegation, Stephen instructed. What's happening at the eastern border? The Leviathan unit's leader explained that Warhawk had sent a new batch of artificial soldiers equipped with an advanced weapon system to Cadus. Maplewood was also providing them with supplies. No matter how many casualties there were, the artificial soldiers were commodities Warhawk could mass-produce in their factories. While Stephen was away, the Leviathan unit's leader had stationed troops at the eastern U.S. border again, but they'd held off on pushing the front lines in case this encouraged the ancient cultivators in Warhawk to step in. How confident are you? Stephen asked. It'll take no more than 24 hours to sweep the entire country of Cadus, the Leviathan unit's leader replied. We've accumulated a large supply of ammunition. Stephen shook his head. Cadus is just a battlefield that Warhawk has chosen to fight on. There's no benefit to destroying it. Before the war, we had fortresses, production lines, and businesses there. Instead of trampling the country, launch an attack at their ports and airports to trap them. Then find an opportunity to attack Warhawk's army. After the meeting, Stephen went to check on Ren's students. It was because of them that he didn't have to worry about the human realm as much while he was participating in the first 2 rounds of the City Lord Challenge. How's the competition going? Emmett asked, swirling the wine in his glass. Any hope of becoming a City Lord? Nope, my cultivation is low. I wouldn't have made it through the first 2 rounds if it weren't for my companions. Stephen went on to tell them about the attack on the Infinite Prison. The unique structure of the building deterred people from attempting a rescue. One mistake, and all of the prisoners would fall to their deaths in the abyss. So far, the culprit and their motive were a mystery.
Are they really offering that high of a reward for catching the culprit? Seth asked. I can't wait to go back to the Elysian realm and catch them. Any leads? I'm suspecting the ancient cultivators, Stephen said. I encountered them during the challenge, but I don't know why they were there or why they would attack the prison. I have to wrap things up in the human realm before going back, so feel free to make a fortune with this intel. Ren's students were thrilled at the prospect of completing the commission and receiving a generous reward. They left to prepare for their trip back to the Elysian realm. The temporary peace in Cadus was interrupted by artillery fire. King Javon Lorenz was anxiously pacing back and forth at the Imperial Palace. Where did the attack come from? The eastern U.S. border, one of his ministers replied. They've targeted our ports and airports. Why did they attack all of a sudden? They've been silent for so long. The ministers looked at each other. They didn't know either. Farid and the new commander, Damaris, were woken up in the middle of the night by the attack. There's no casualties, Damaris' subordinate reported, but our fleet was blown up. Repairs won't be possible.
Farid plastered a grave expression on his face as Damaris cursed and ordered his subordinate to retaliate. The commander of the eastern U.S. border's military base had received news from the military's upper management that this might happen, and he mercilessly fired back. As the war resumed in full swing, the Alliance Security Company held a meeting. The mercenaries glared at Nate, demanding an explanation. Why are they so fearless after almost a month of silence? Nate forced himself to keep his voice from trembling. I heard Stephen's back. What do you mean? He should have been killed during the City Lord Challenge. Our guild sent out members to participate. The surge of aura in the room made Nate shake uncontrollably, but he didn't dare lie to the mercenaries. My family saw him in Annapolis. He was conducting an inspection around the city. The Cassidy family was very familiar with Stephen's face. They would never mistake him for someone else. The mercenaries ordered Nate to head to the front lines and get an update on the situation. The peaceful days of eating and drinking at the Imperial Palace came to an end. In the initial stages of the war, Warhawk and the mercenaries had formed an alliance, and as the CEO of the Alliance Security Company, Nate had the right to be the mercenary spokesperson. This is a pointless trap, Nate complained to his subordinates from the Cassidy family. I'm risking my life for no reason. I'm not a martial artist. I'll die from one round of bullets. If we stay in the camp, we might make it out alive. And then what? Nate demanded. As long as Stephen's alive, we won't be able to return to the U.S. We'll be stuck in Cadus forever. Nate understood his own limitations. Just because he'd become the head of the Cassidy family didn't mean his safety was guaranteed. To protect himself, he had to follow the mercenaries. As they approached the border, the sound of explosions became louder. Nate and his subordinates went through an extensive identification process before gaining entry into the underground command post. Warhawk's army was made up of artificial soldiers, but the captains behind the scenes were human martial artists. They didn't take Nate or his subordinates seriously. Are you here to take charge or to watch the show? What combat experience do you have? Officers, please don't mind me, Nate said. I'm here on behalf of the Imperial Palace to assess the situation on the front lines. My task is to deliver information to the king. Go ahead, try not to die. Warhawk's captains had other responsibilities to attend to. They didn't have time for Nate. If he wanted information, then he could monitor the battlefield through the monitor. The cannons at the U.S. fortress had been firing for more than 2 hours. They were using normal artillery shells, but the difference in damage output between the U.S. and Warhawk was 10-1. Our aircraft have locked onto the cannons, but we can't destroy their bunkers. Should we request a more powerful missile from the Parliament? It's not that time for that yet. We're just testing each other. Since we can't target their bunkers, aim for the surrounding areas. If we're lucky, we'll blow up their warehouse or transportation route. Warhawk's captains were quite experienced, and just like that, they engaged in a heated battle of firepower with the commander of the eastern U.S. border's military base and his team.